Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Now we've reviewed the Kane 999 proposal and found it wanting, genocidal. We've reviewed the Perry flat tax proposal taken from the toothy geek Steve Forbes, failed candidate of 96 and 2000. Found that wanting. We're now looking at the Ron Paul proposal. And I'm afraid this proposal also falls short. Specifically, notice that although Ron Paul has talked about the Federal Reserve many times over the years, there's nothing in this plan that diminishes the power of the Federal Reserve. There's no change in the status of the Federal Reserve. He says that he wants to audit the Federal Reserve. That's fine. I don't need an audit of the Federal Reserve to tell you what they do. I know what they do, and it's this question of their monetary stimulus, which doesn't work, the pushing on a string, the 0% interbank lending and all that, and I see their credit stimulus, which is reserved for banks, credit card companies, and other financial institutions. So therefore, I don't need an audit. The audit itself is also maybe a dubious tactic. You have to remember back in Germany in the early 1930s, Hjalmar Schacht, a very sinister individual who went on later to become Hitler's finance minister, proposed an audit of the Reichsbank in order to diminish the power of Hans Luther, who at that time was the head of it, and this was simply a power play by one faction against another. So I think we'd have to be, people who have believed in Ron Paul must be, I think, profoundly dismayed that there's nothing in here that touches the Federal Reserve. Compare this to my program. My program says nationalize the Federal Reserve, open it all up. That will accomplish the audit in effect. Don't let unelected committees of faceless, unaccountable bankers, most of them extreme reactionaries to proto-fascists, don't let those bankers continue their stranglehold. The credit creation power belongs to the American people. We intend to use it to create an economic recovery because we are not economic defeatists. I notice Ron Paul likes to go around saying the United States is bankrupt. Well, the United States is not bankrupt. The United States doesn't need to be bankrupt. Simply use the obvious tools that are at your disposal, and a recovery is within reach. The constant harping on bankruptcy is used as a cover story to attack the social safety net and to carry out other things that we don't need. So first, I think, shortfall in the Ron Paul program, no attack on the Federal Reserve, no change, just this audit. The second problem is that even in its own terms, the Ron Paul budget will not work. And the heart of it is he says that he will get you to balance in the federal budget in the third year of his presidency. This will not occur, I guarantee you. The only method that he's going to use to get to this is budget cuts. He's talking about cutting $1 trillion out of the federal budget in the first year of his presidency, and then with similar brutal, draconian cuts going on towards a balanced budget in the third year of his presidency. I guarantee you this will not balance the budget. The laws of the physical universe tell us that this is not going to happen. We have the historical examples, Pointing, Schwarzenegger, Papandreou, Socrates in Portugal. Budget cuts this year create bigger deficits next year, especially in a depression, when private sector economic activity is depressed, when the government activity is the main support and sustenance of the economy. You cut the federal budget, you are cutting into economic activity itself. Tax rates go down, unemployment goes up, your production goes down, and your budget deficit gets to be bigger. Now, let's just look at some of these comparisons. The U.S. federal budget right now is $3.73 trillion per year. What Ron Paul is proposing with a $1 trillion cut in the first year is a 27% cut in the federal budget. He wants to cut 10% out of the federal workforce, and we'll talk about some of these details in a minute. But let's just focus on the big bottom line numbers. $3.73 trillion is the federal budget. Ron Paul wants to cut $1 trillion out of that, a 27% cut, somewhere between 1/4 and 1/3. That's the first year, and I don't know what happens the year after that, but it's not going to look good. He claims this will get you to cut. Well, let's go back and compare this to Brüning in Germany in 1930 to 1932. Over a period of 2 years, Brüning cut the German budget by about 14%. There's some accounts say a little bit more, something like 20%. But certainly the Brüning austerity, which is one of the most legendary landmarks in austerity, looks like it's about half the size of what Ron Paul is proposing. In other words, the Ron Paul austerity is twice as severe as Brüning. Now, under Brüning, what happened? If you cut spending by 14% over 2 years, in those same 2 years, the gross domestic product of Germany fell by 29%. So production is down by a third. Tax receipts went down by 26% to 30% year to year. So that's between a quarter and a third. And you see, therefore, that Germany did not balance a budget based on these methods. So this simply, it's a failure. The economic austerity route to balanced budget is impractical. And then you have to ask yourself, what is the goal of this? Isn't the point of balancing the budget, at least in the propaganda, to obtain an economic recovery? Well, there's not going to be an economic recovery. Even the various mainstream characters point out the fact that if you cut into your tax receipts in this way, your budget is actually going to increase. Now, he wants to fire 10% of the federal workforce. Federal workforce right now, military and civilian, 4.4 million. He wants to fire, therefore, 440,000 people. That would pitch many areas into local depression. That would be a 10% cut. But it's also estimated that the $1 trillion of budget cuts would have a severe impact on the private sector. One estimate I've seen is that unemployment would go up 3% as a result of the $1 trillion of budget cuts. I guess you could, as a rule of thumb, you might say the Obama stimulus got you 2 or 3% increased employment, and the Ron Paul cutting of that would get you about 3% more jobless. So this would take your jobless up to 12%, but of course it might be more. But even at that rate, the tax revenues continue to collapse. Germany in 1932, as a result of the Brüning austerity, which again is only half as severe, reached 30%. And I think if we estimate right now that the real unemployment in the United States is probably 22, 23, 24%, something like this. Count the discouraged workers, count the ones that have fallen through the cracks. With 3% more, the United States would, grosso modo, approach 30% unemployment. And again, why do this? Ron Paul wants to wipe out the Department of Energy. I say no, because this is where nuclear energy has to be developed and promoted. Our national laboratories, among other things, the cutting edge of competitiveness in the modern world. Housing and urban development. I have to say no to that one, too. Public housing needs to be built. That's one of the uses for 0% federal credit coming from the Federal Reserve. We'll get back to this in just a second on World Crisis Radio.